My husband cheated. I packed my kids and drove to my parents' house. My father opened the door, looked at my two children standing behind me, then slowly closed it. My brother said there was no space. My sister called me impulsive. I picked up that garbage bag, walked back to my car, and whispered two words. Watch me. My name is Tara. I am 32 years old and I work as an antique appraiser. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who completely underestimated your worth. The rain was coming down in sheets when my entire life shattered into pieces at 2 in the morning. I had returned home early from an estate sale in Savannah, only to find unfamiliar luxury cars parked in my driveway. When I walked into the master bedroom of the house I paid the mortgage on, I caught my husband Julian tangled in our sheets with another woman. Julian is 34 years old. He loves to introduce himself as a chief financial officer at prestigious networking events. In reality, he is a glorified accountant who spends more time managing his public image than his spreadsheets. When I turned on the lights, he did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He just smirked and told me to close the door because I was letting a cold draft in. I did not scream or throw things. I walked straight to the bedrooms of my 8-year-old son Miles and my 5-year-old daughter Leah. I woke them up gently and told them we were going on a late-night adventure. I grabbed a single heavy black garbage bag from the hallway closet and threw whatever I could reach into it. As I marched toward the front door, Julian stood at the top of the stairs in his boxers laughing. He told me I was making a fool of myself. He reminded me that he controlled all our joint accounts and that I would be back by morning begging for forgiveness. I strapped my confused, sleepy children into their car seats and drove away into the torrential rain. The heavy drops hammered against my windshield as I headed toward the affluent Atlanta suburbs where my parents lived. My father, Harrison, is a prominent pastor at one of the largest churches in the city and a wealthy real estate investor. My mother, Brenda, is obsessed with her social standing among the local elite. They lived in a sprawling mansion secured behind tall iron gates. I thought that in my absolute darkest moment, they would provide a safe harbor for my children. I pulled into their pristine circular driveway and hurried to the massive oak front doors. The freezing rain soaked through my clothes as I rang the bell repeatedly. Finally, the door opened just a tiny crack. My father stood there in his silk robe. He looked at my soaking wet hair. He looked at Miles and Leah shivering behind me. Then his expression hardened into cold disapproval. He did not step aside to let us in. Instead, my mother Brenda appeared over his shoulder. Her voice cut through the loud rain like a sharp knife. She told me to go back home and apologize to Julian. She said that all men have their moments of weakness, and that divorcing a successful man like Julian over a simple mistake would humiliate our family in front of the entire church congregation. She demanded I stop making a scene and act like a proper wife. I stood there shivering and begged them just to let the kids inside out of the storm. Before my father could answer, my brother Malcolm pushed his way to the front. Malcolm is 35 years old and has always been the golden child. He runs a real estate business funded entirely by our father and can do no wrong in their eyes. Malcolm sneered at me and said there was simply no space in their 10,000-square-foot mansion for my annoying drama. He reached into his pocket and tossed a crumpled $100 bill onto the wet porch. He told me to go buy a cheap hotel room and stop embarrassing the family name. Just then, his wife Heather appeared beside him. Heather is a 33-year-old white woman who loves to weaponize her privileged background through passive-aggressive comments. She looked me up and down with absolute disdain. She sighed heavily and said it was very typical of me to be so dramatic and impulsive. She told me that children need a stable home environment, not a mother who runs away into the night over a minor disagreement. She suggested I take some deep breaths and stop playing the victim. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from my 28-year-old sister Ebony. Ebony has always been pragmatic and completely dependent on our parents' money. The message read that the new mistress of Julian was her friend. Ebony told me the woman was pregnant. She demanded I hand over the house to Julian and his new family and told me to stop causing trouble for everyone. The sheer magnitude of their collective betrayal washed over me. I looked at the $100 bill getting soaked on the concrete. I looked at my father, whose hand was resting on the brass door handle, preparing to shut it in my face. I realized then that I had never truly had a family. I was nothing to them but a prop in their perfect social narrative. I picked up my heavy garbage bag, grabbed my children by their small hands, and turned around. As my father slowly closed the heavy oak door, I walked back to my car. I put the kids inside gently. I leaned against the wet steering wheel and whispered 2 words into the darkness. Watch me. I drove until I found a cheap, run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. The neon sign buzzed loudly in the rain. I used the last $50 in my personal checking account to pay for the room. The space smelled like stale smoke and damp carpet. I tucked Miles and Leah into the scratchy sheets and waited until their steady breathing told me they were finally asleep. Then I sat on the floor and pulled the heavy black garbage bag toward me. When I had been rushing through the hallway closet earlier, I had grabbed the bag without looking. I thought it contained winter coats. Instead, I found 3 large canvases covered in thick layers of grime and awful cheap paint. I recognized them immediately. A month ago, I had helped my parents clean out their basement. My mother had pointed to these exact canvases and called them cheap ghetto trash. She said they ruined the aesthetic of her newly renovated home and ordered me to throw them in the dumpster. My professional instincts as an appraiser had kicked in back then. The canvas material felt unusually old and heavy, so I had secretly kept them and tossed them into my closet, meaning to examine them later. Now, sitting on the floor of a miserable motel room, I had nothing else to do. I pulled my small appraisal kit from my purse. It was the only thing I always carried with me. I used a specialized solvent to carefully dab away a small section of the awful top layer of paint on the first canvas. My heart stopped. Underneath the sloppy modern acrylic lay a stunning portrait painted in rich, vibrant oils. I gently rubbed away another corner. I saw the unmistakable brushstrokes of a legendary artist from the Harlem Renaissance. This was a lost masterpiece. I moved to the second canvas and then the third. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the solvent bottle. All 3 paintings were authentic lost works from one of the most important African-American artists of the 20th century. These paintings had been missing for over 70 years. My parents, in their obsession with modern status and expensive catalog furniture, had almost sent a fortune to the city dump without a thought. I sat on the hard motel floor until the sun came up, holding the canvases like they were made of solid gold. At exactly 8 the next morning, I dropped my kids off at school. Then I drove straight to a highly exclusive private auction house in the center of Atlanta. The director is a professional contact I have known for years. He took one look at the partially restored canvases and brought me immediately into his private, secure office. He brought in his top restoration experts. They examined the amazing historical works for 3 consecutive hours. The room was perfectly silent except for the clicking of their magnifying tools and the soft hum of the building ventilation system. Finally, the director sat across from me. He placed his hands flat on his large glass desk. He told me the paintings were absolutely authentic. He said that once they were fully cleaned and authenticated, they would definitely be the massive highlight of the upcoming winter auction. He handed me an official preliminary appraisal document. I looked down at the bold black numbers printed on the crisp white paper. $3,500,000. The breath left my lungs completely. I closed my eyes and let the reality of those massive numbers wash over me. In a single night, I had gone from being a discarded, desperate mother to a multimillionaire. I asked the director to keep my identity completely anonymous. I signed the consignment contracts right there in his office. As I was walking back to my car, my cell phone rang loudly. The screen displayed Julian calling. I answered it, bringing the phone to my ear. Julian sounded smug and incredibly arrogant. He told me he had contacted the local bank as soon as they opened today. He bragged that he had frozen all of our joint checking and savings accounts. He said I had zero access to any of our money. He laughed into the phone and told me I was probably sitting in my car crying. He demanded I come back to the house, beg for his forgiveness, and accept my place while he moved his new pregnant girlfriend into the master bedroom. I stood in the parking lot holding the appraisal document that guaranteed me $3.5 million. I felt a cold, sharp smile spread slowly across my entire face today. The terrified, heartbroken woman from last night was completely gone forever. In her place was someone entirely new. I listened to Julian breathing heavily into the phone, waiting for my tears. "Keep the change, Julian," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly steady. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. I looked up at the bright morning sky. The storm had passed, and the air felt crisp and clean. My family thought they had broken me. They thought they could close their doors and leave me to drown in the rain. They had absolutely no idea what I was about to become. I opened my car door and placed the folder carefully onto the passenger seat. I knew exactly what my next move would be. The betrayal I suffered was deeply painful, but it was also the absolute best thing that could have happened to me. They gave me the fuel I needed to burn their entire fake empire to the ground. I started my engine and drove away from the auction house, ready to build a kingdom of my own. They laughed when I had nowhere to go, but soon they would be begging for absolute mercy. 3 years pass in the blink of an eye when you are busy building an empire in absolute silence. The cold, pouring rain of that miserable night feels like a lifetime ago as my driver opens the door of my black Maybach. I step out into the crisp, bright morning air of downtown Atlanta. My heels click sharply against the pristine pavement as I walk toward the towering glass and steel high-rise that houses my company. The doormen nod respectfully as I pass through the grand lobby. They know me only as the quiet owner of the penthouse floor. No one in my past life could possibly recognize the woman I have become. I am no longer the exhausted mother standing on a wet porch begging for mercy. I am now the anonymous chief executive officer of Vanguard Estates. We are the most ruthless private equity firm in the city. We specialize in acquiring distressed assets, liquidating weak companies, and managing wealth for the invisible elite. When I sold those 3 Harlem Renaissance masterpieces 3 years ago for over $3 million, I did not buy a flashy car or a big house. I kept my head down. I rented a modest apartment in a safe neighborhood and enrolled Miles and Leah in a beautiful private school where they are now thriving. Then I took every single remaining dollar and quietly invested it in distressed real estate and aggressive market funds. I multiplied that money 10 times over. Then I multiplied it again. I built Vanguard Estates from the ground up, hiding my identity behind layers of corporate trusts and legal proxies. My face is nowhere on the company website. My name is never printed in the local business magazines. I operate entirely in the shadows, controlling millions of dollars with a single phone call. My family has absolutely no idea about any of this. They still believe I am a desperate failure. They assume I am living in some rundown apartment barely surviving on minimum wage. My younger sister Ebony occasionally sends me mocking text messages asking if I need her to mail me some expired grocery coupons or if I have finally found a man to take care of me. My mother Brenda leaves voicemails every few months just to remind me that Julian is doing wonderfully with his new wife and that I ruined my own life by being too stubborn. I never reply to their messages. I never answer their calls. I simply let them believe their own lies while I sit in my penthouse office and watch their fake empire slowly crumble from afar. I enter my massive corner office and walk toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the sprawling Atlanta skyline. My assistant David walks in quietly behind me, holding a silver tray with my morning coffee and a remarkably thick leather folder. David is a brilliant young man who knows exactly how I like my business handled. He sets the coffee on my desk and opens the folder. He tells me that we have a new applicant for a massive emergency bridge loan. He says the clients are incredibly desperate and are asking for $15 million to be wired into their accounts by the end of the month. I take a sip of my coffee and ask him who the applicant is. David looks at his notes and says the loan request is for a luxury commercial housing development called the Legacy Project. A slow, cold smile spreads across my face. The Legacy Project is the crown jewel of my father, Harrison, and my brother, Malcolm. It was supposed to be a massive high-end residential complex that would cement their status as the most powerful real estate developers in the church community. I ask David to walk me through their current financials. David explains that the project has been completely dead in the water for 2 entire years. He tells me that they have mismanaged their construction budget so badly that they owe millions to their contractors. Their permits are expiring, and their initial investors are threatening to pull out and sue them for fraud. I look down at the executive summary page and see the name of their chief financial officer. It is Julian. My ex-husband is the one managing their books. He is the one who confidently signed the application begging Vanguard Estates for a $15 million lifeline. He has absolutely no idea that he just submitted his financial life to the woman he threw out into the rain. David then flips to the final page of his forensic audit. His voice drops lower as he reveals the darkest secret my family has been hiding. Our analysts dug deep into their corporate accounts to see how they were surviving the construction delays. David explains that Julian and Malcolm have been faking their quarterly revenue reports. But worse than that, they have been secretly funneling massive amounts of money from my father's megachurch congregation fund. They have been stealing millions of dollars from the weekly donations of working-class church members just to cover the massive losses on the Legacy Project. I stare at the financial flowcharts David has prepared. The evidence is absolutely undeniable. My father, the respected pastor, has allowed his son and my ex-husband to treat the church bank accounts like a personal piggy bank. David tells me that the federal tax auditors are scheduled to review the church finances at the end of next month. If Harrison, Malcolm, and Julian do not get this $15 million loan from us to silently replace the stolen church funds, they will be exposed. The Federal Bureau of Investigation will arrest them all for massive corporate embezzlement and wire fraud. They are staring down the barrel of a 10-year federal prison sentence. The sheer poetry of the situation is almost intoxicating. The very men who called me a dramatic failure, who told me I had no space in their home, who laughed while I walked away with my children in garbage bags, are now unknowingly begging me to save them from total destruction. They think Vanguard Estates is run by some faceless old white billionaire. They are praying to me for salvation, and they do not even know it. I set my coffee cup down. I look at David and instruct him to draft the official loan denial paperwork immediately. I tell him to prepare the rejection, but to hold it in his desk and keep it strictly confidential. I do not want them to know they have been denied until the exact perfect moment. David nods and hands me the morning mail before stepping out of the office. I sift through the usual business correspondence until my hands stop on a thick, heavy, cream-colored envelope. The return address is embossed in shiny gold foil. It is from my mother, Brenda. I open the envelope carefully. Inside is an elaborate invitation to my parents' 40th wedding anniversary gala. The venue listed is the most exclusive and expensive country club in Atlanta. My stomach turns with disgust. They are completely bankrupt. They are stealing money from poor church members to avoid federal prison. Yet they are still spending tens of thousands of dollars on a lavish party just to maintain their fake wealthy image in front of high society. A small, handwritten piece of stationery falls out of the invitation and lands on my desk. I pick it up. The handwriting belongs to my mother. The note is vicious and cruel. She wrote that I am allowed to attend the celebration only if I have finally managed to find a real job that does not embarrass them. She explicitly instructed me to wear something decent for once and demanded that I use the service entrance around the back of the country club so the important church elders and city politicians would not see her impoverished daughter walking through the main doors. She ended the note by saying Julian and his beautiful new wife would be sitting at the head table and that I should stay out of their way. I read the hateful words twice. The sheer audacity of her demands is almost funny. 3 years ago, those words would have crushed my spirit, and sent me crying into my pillow. Today they just validate everything I am about to do. I think about my brother Malcolm, throwing a crumpled $100 bill at my freezing children. I think about my white sister-in-law Heather rolling her eyes and calling me a burden. I think about Julian smirking in my bedroom telling me I would come crawling back. I think about my sister Ebony selling me out to Julian's mistress just to stay in my parents' good graces. I press the intercom button on my desk and call David back into the office. When he enters, I hand him the cream-colored invitation. I tell him to cancel all my evening meetings and engagements for the upcoming Saturday. I tell him I am going to a family party. I then instruct him to prepare a very specific leather portfolio for me to carry that night. I want the portfolio to contain the official loan denial paperwork for the $15 million. I want it to contain the complete forensic audit showing exactly how they embezzled the church funds. And I want it to contain a few other specific legal surprises that I have been quietly gathering over the past 2 years. David smiles knowingly and asks if I will need security to accompany me to the country club. I tell him no. I do not need security to deal with cowards. I turn my chair back to face the sprawling window. The city of Atlanta looks so small from up here. My family has spent their entire lives treating me like I was invisible. They wanted me to stay in the shadows and use the service entrance. They wanted me to quietly disappear so they could pretend they were perfect. But they are about to learn that the woman they threw away did not just survive the storm. She became the storm. I will walk through the front doors of that gala, and I will serve them the absolute destruction they have worked so hard to earn. Saturday evening arrives with a heavy, humid heat that hangs over Atlanta. I sit in the back of my Maybach as my driver pulls up to the towering illuminated gates of the Buckhead Country Club. My mother explicitly told me to use the service entrance in the back where the kitchen staff and the valet attendants take their breaks. She wanted me to slip in unseen, like a shameful secret. Instead, my driver stops right at the grand front entrance under the massive crystal chandelier of the portico. The valet rushes forward to open my door. I step out wearing a custom-fitted dark emerald silk gown that cost more than my parents' first house. It has no flashy logos or heavy jewels. To the untrained, desperate eyes of my family, it might look plain, but anyone with real wealth knows exactly what I'm wearing. I clutch my black leather portfolio tightly in my hand. It contains the exact documents that will end their fake royal status forever. I walk through the heavy brass doors of the club and hand my coat to the attendant. The main ballroom is overflowing with an absolutely nauseating display of stolen wealth. Massive walls of white orchids and imported roses block the windows. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos carry silver trays loaded with premium champagne and caviar. The room is packed with the most influential members of my father's megachurch congregation. There are local politicians, wealthy business owners, and church elders who have blindly trusted my father with their hard-earned money. They are all laughing and drinking, completely unaware that the caviar they are eating was paid for by their own stolen weekly donations. I barely take 3 steps into the ballroom before a shrill voice cuts through the soft jazz music. It is Heather, my white sister-in-law. She pushes her way through a crowd of church elders, making a beeline straight for me. Heather is wearing a heavily sequined silver dress that practically screams for attention. She holds a glass of champagne in one hand and uses the other to aggressively grab my arm. She looks me up and down with an expression of pure pity, mixed with deep condescension. She sighs loudly enough for the people nearby to hear. "Oh, Tara," she says, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You actually came. I have to admit it is so brave of you to wear an off-the-rack dress to an event like this. I know things have been incredibly tight for you lately, but you really should have let me take you to the clearance racks at the mall." I look at her hand resting on my emerald silk sleeve. I do not pull away. I just stare at her perfectly manicured nails. Heather continues her performance. She leans in close and drops her voice to a loud stage whisper, ensuring that the wealthy church ladies standing nearby catch every single word. She tells me that she was just talking to my mother about how hard my life must be living in a tiny apartment with two growing children. She tilts her head and gives me a sad, pathetic smile. She asks if I need her to talk to the kitchen staff and wrap up some leftover chicken and bread for Miles and Leah. She says it would be a shame to see all this wonderful high-class food go to waste when my poor children probably go to bed hungry. I just stand there and let her dig her grave deeper and deeper. I do not raise my voice. I do not defend my dress or my children. I just smile a cold, dead smile. I know something that Heather does not know. I know that her wealthy family trust fund, the one she brags about at every single country club luncheon, was secretly mortgaged by my brother Malcolm to keep their failing real estate project afloat. I know that she is standing here acting like royalty while she is actually completely broke. Her entire privileged existence is tied up in a fraudulent loan application that is currently sitting inside the leather portfolio in my hand. I simply tell Heather that I appreciate her deep concern for my children, but that Miles and Leah are eating just fine tonight. Heather rolls her eyes and takes a large gulp of her champagne, muttering something about how poor people are always too proud to accept charity. She pats my shoulder one last time and walks away to rejoin her wealthy friends, completely unaware that she is a walking ghost. I continue walking through the ballroom, making my way toward the massive head table. My father Harrison is standing at the center of the room, surrounded by the most powerful deacons and elders of the church. He is wearing a custom-tailored velvet suit and holding a crystal glass of sparkling cider. He is laughing loudly and telling a story when he suddenly catches sight of me. His smile freezes for a fraction of a second, but he is a master manipulator. He quickly recovers and opens his arms wide, putting on a spectacular show for his audience. He calls out my name, declaring that his lost daughter has finally returned to the fold. The church elders turn to look at me with soft, judgmental smiles. Harrison pulls me into a stiff, awkward hug that is meant entirely for the cameras. He turns to the church elders and begins to deliver a sermon right there on the ballroom floor. He tells them that family is all about grace and forgiveness. He gestures toward me as if I am a charity case he brought in from the cold streets. He says that no matter how many mistakes a child makes, a good Christian father always leaves the door cracked open. Then he abruptly drops his arm from my shoulder and points across the room to Malcolm and Julian. He tells the elders that while some children struggle, others rise to become the absolute pillars of the community. He praises Malcolm and Julian for their incredible work on the Legacy Housing Project, claiming they are building a monument to the community's success. The elders nod and murmur words of agreement, completely blinded by his charisma. Hearing his name, Julian strides over to join the circle. My ex-husband looks incredibly smug. He is wearing an expensive tailored tuxedo and a luxury watch that I know for a fact he bought using a stolen company credit card. Clinging tightly to his arm is his new wife. She is heavily pregnant, her belly pressing tightly against her designer maternity gown. Looking at her brings a familiar flash of disgust. She is not a stranger. She was my sister, Ebony's absolute best friend. 3 years ago, while I was hosting family dinners and trusting the people around me, Ebony was sneaking this woman into my home and helping Julian hide his affair. Julian stops right in front of me, blocking my path to the table. He looks at my leather portfolio and lets out a short, mocking laugh. He asks if I brought my resume to the anniversary party, hoping one of the church elders would offer me a secretarial job. His new wife giggles and rests her hand dramatically on her pregnant belly. Julian leans in and tells me I look exhausted and poor. He says he hopes I took the bus here because the valet parking costs more than my entire weekly grocery budget. He puffs out his chest and tells the surrounding elders that his company is just days away from securing a massive $15 million loan from a private equity firm. He boasts that the executives at Vanguard Estates practically begged him to take their money because his financial projections were so brilliant. The new wife smiles at me and says it is a shame I could not keep a successful man happy. She tells me Julian is a provider and a genius, and that I should have just learned my place when I had the chance. I stand completely still, surrounded by the men who destroyed my life and the woman who helped them do it. I look at Julian's arrogant face. I look at my father's proud fake smile. I look at the elders who think Julian is a financial savior. I grip my portfolio a little tighter. I tell Julian that his financial projections are indeed very interesting, and that I am sure Vanguard Estates found them absolutely fascinating to read. Julian just sneers at me, totally missing the weight of my words. He tells me to go stand by the kitchen doors and stay out of the official family photographs. The hours drag on and the party reaches its extravagant peak. Speeches have been made, toasts have been given, and more expensive bottles of imported wine have been opened. The church elders start saying their goodbyes, wrapping up the night of fake celebration. I am standing near the back of the room watching the head table closely. A sharply dressed restaurant manager approaches the table holding a black leather billfold. The party is ending, and it is time to pay for the absolute massive display of wealth my family just put on. The manager respectfully hands the billfold to my brother Malcolm. I can see the total printed on the receipt from across the room. It is $25,000. They spent $25,000 of stolen church money on flowers and crab cakes just to prove they are better than everyone else. Malcolm does not even look at the bill. He pulls out his heavy platinum credit card and tosses it onto the silver tray with an arrogant flick of his wrist. The manager bows slightly and walks away to the payment terminal near the bar. 2 minutes later, the manager returns. His professional smile is slightly strained. He leans down and whispers quietly into Malcolm's ear. Malcolm's face instantly drops. The arrogant smirk vanishes, completely replaced by a look of sheer panic. He snatches the card back and tells the manager to run it again, claiming their machine must be broken. The manager shakes his head and says he ran it 3 times. The card is completely maxed out and declined by the bank. Julian notices the commotion and lets out an annoyed sigh. He tells Malcolm to stop embarrassing them in front of the remaining guests. Julian pulls out his own corporate credit card, the one tied directly to their fraudulent real estate company. He hands it to the manager and loudly declares that he will cover the evening expenses since his company is about to secure a $15 million loan anyway. The manager takes the card and walks away again. This time, it only takes 60 seconds. The manager returns and places Julian's card on the table. He announces much louder this time that Julian's card has also been entirely declined. The bank has placed a hard freeze on the account due to suspicious activity. The color drains from Julian's face. He stares at the plastic card like it is a venomous snake. My father, Harrison, realizes what is happening, and his eyes dart nervously around the room to see if any church members are watching this humiliating disaster unfold. My mother, Brenda, suddenly jumps up from her chair. The absolute panic of being exposed as a fraud in front of her country club friends is tearing her apart. She scans the room desperately until her eyes lock onto me, standing quietly near the back wall. Brenda marches across the ballroom floor, her face twisted with aggressive desperation. She grabs my arm, pulling me toward the table. She tells me I have caused this family enough shame and embarrassment over the years. She says it is my fault they are stressed and distracted. She orders me to pull out whatever pathetic savings I have and pay the $25,000 bill immediately. She hisses in my face, demanding that I empty my bank account, take out a payday loan, or do whatever it takes to fix this situation right now to make up for being such a massive disappointment to their perfect family. I look down at my mother's manicured fingers digging violently into the delicate dark emerald silk of my sleeve. She is physically shaking with absolute panic, her eyes wide and desperate as she demands I fix the catastrophic humiliation her golden boys just caused. $25,000. She actually wants me to take out a high-interest payday loan or drain whatever pathetic savings she assumes I have to cover a single luxurious dinner bill while the men she worships stand there sweating in their custom-tailored tuxedos. I gently but firmly peel her trembling fingers off my arm one by one. I do not raise my voice, but the absolute zero temperature of my tone makes her physically step back away from me. I tell her to breathe slowly. I tell her it would be a terrible shame to have a stroke right here in front of the remaining church elders over a few crumpled, worthless credit cards. I reach slowly into my black leather designer clutch. My family watches my hands like starved hawks, fully expecting me to pull out a worn plastic debit card, or perhaps a crumpled checkbook that will undoubtedly bounce. Instead, my fingers trace the cold, heavy titanium edges of my American Express Centurion Black card. It is not something you can simply apply for. It is an invitation-only status symbol reserved strictly for the absolute highest tier of global wealth. I pull it out and place the heavy dark metal card onto the waiting silver tray. It makes a sharp, solid metallic clink as it hits the polished surface. My brother Malcolm stares at it. His eyes practically bulge out of his skull. He plays in the real estate world, so he knows exactly what that specific card represents. Julian knows too. His jaw drops slightly as he recognizes the unmistakable matte black titanium finish that he has only ever seen in the hands of the billionaires he desperately tries to mimic. The restaurant manager, who I had privately spoken with before the dinner, even started steps forward immediately. He does not question me. He does not ask for identification or look at me with the suspicion he usually reserves for people who look like me. He simply slides the heavy metal card into his portable payment terminal. 1 second passes. 2 seconds pass. 3 seconds pass. The terminal beeps a cheerful, high-pitched tone and begins to print out the long, itemized receipt. $25,000 approved instantly, without a single hesitation or security alert from the bank. The manager hands me a sleek silver pen. I sign my name with a smooth, practiced motion and hand the tray back to him. The manager bows slightly from the waist and says, "Thank you, Miss Wilson. It is always a profound pleasure to serve you tonight." He walks away toward the kitchen, leaving an absolute deafening silence in his wake. You could hear a pin drop in the massive decorated ballroom. The church elders who were lingering near the exit are now staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. My father Harrison looks like he has just seen a ghost walk through the walls. His mouth is opening and closing, but no sound comes out of his throat. My mother Brenda is completely frozen like a statue, her eyes darting frantically between my calm face and the empty silver tray. They all thought I was utterly destitute. They thought I was living in the dangerous slums, scraping by on minimum wage and eating stale leftovers to survive. Yet I just casually paid a dinner bill that equals an average working person's entire yearly salary, with a single swipe of a card that none of them could ever even dream of qualifying for. The sheer shock of the moment completely paralyzes the entire head table. Nobody moves a muscle, nobody speaks a word. They just stare at me as I slowly lift my crystal glass and take a quiet sip of my sparkling water. The heavy, suffocating silence in the ballroom is finally broken by a harsh, ugly bark of a laugh. The sound comes from my brother Malcolm. His face has turned a deep, violently angry shade of purple-red. His massive, fragile ego, the exact same ego that my parents fed and nurtured and protected for his entire privileged life, has just been completely crushed in front of Atlanta high society. He simply cannot handle the fact that the black sister he threw out into the freezing rain just bailed him out with a level of liquid wealth he does not possess and can barely comprehend. He points a shaking, aggressive finger at me and raises his voice so loudly that the sound echoes off the crystal chandeliers, ensuring everyone in the room can hear him. "Who is your wealthy sugar daddy, Tara?" he sneers, his voice dripping with pure toxic misogyny and bitter desperation. That is the absolute only way a divorced, dropout single mother gets her hands on a Centurion Black card. What old rich white billionaire are you sleeping with in secret to fund this little pathetic illusion of yours? My mother gasps loudly, but she does not stop him from speaking. She actually looks deeply relieved by his disgusting accusation, because it gives her a convenient excuse to completely dismiss my financial power. Julian immediately jumps into the conversation, eager to salvage his own severely bruised pride in front of his pregnant new wife. He scoffs loudly and crosses his arms, telling the lingering church elders that the black card must definitely be stolen or a clever fake. He says there is absolutely no logical way a failed antique appraiser who used to dig through garbage could ever legally obtain that kind of unlimited credit line. He looks at his new wife and smirks, saying that lazy women like me always look for the easiest way out instead of doing real honest work, like managing corporate portfolios. He tells my father Harrison that they should probably call the police right now because I am highly likely involved in some sort of massive international credit card fraud scheme. I just stand there perfectly still, listening to the weak men in my family try to tear me down, using the most predictable, pathetic insults imaginable. They are so deeply threatened by my visible financial independence that their only psychological defense mechanism is to loudly accuse me of selling my body or committing a serious felony. They simply cannot fathom a reality where a black woman, where their own discarded sister and abused ex-wife outsmarted them, outworked them, and out-earned them in every possible metric. Heather! My white sister-in-law eagerly chimes in, her voice shaking with intense, uncontrollable jealousy. She demands to know exactly where I got the money, claiming that Malcolm is a brilliant real estate developer who works 80-hour weeks to build the community, and even he does not have a black card in his wallet. The sheer unadulterated entitlement radiating from her is genuinely amusing to witness. I look at Malcolm sweating profusely in his expensive rented tuxedo. I look at Julian desperately trying to look like a wealthy executive, while his own fraudulent corporate card just declined over crab cakes. I let them hurl their vicious insults. I let them expose their deep-rotting insecurities to the entire room of watching guests. I do not defend my honor or explain my investments. I do not scream or cry or try to justify my existence to them. I just smile. It is a cold, predatory smile that makes Malcolm falter mid-sentence. It is a smile that makes Julian's smug, arrogant expression slowly melt into a look of deep, uneasy confusion. They fully expect me to break down. They expect me to run away crying into the night, just like I did 3 years ago when they locked me out. But they are talking to a completely different woman now. I look directly into Malcolm's angry, sweating face and tell him that my wealth does not come from a sugar daddy. I tell him it comes from making extremely calculated decisions, while arrogant, foolish men like him make careless, stupid mistakes that cost them everything. Before Malcolm can even open his mouth to respond to my insult, the heavy mahogany double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom swing wide open with a loud, dramatic thud. The sudden noise echoes across the tense, silent room, drawing every single eye away from our table and toward the brightly lit entryway. A tall, distinguished older man in a sharp, bespoke charcoal suit strides purposefully into the room. He carries a sleek black leather briefcase and radiates an aura of absolute corporate authority and immense power. My father Harrison gasps out loud, clutching his chest. Malcolm and Julian both freeze completely, their eyes widening in sudden recognition. They know exactly who this man is. It is Richard Vance, the senior legal counsel and chief operating officer for Vanguard Estates. He is the exact man who has been personally handling their highly desperate application for the $15 million bridge loan. Malcolm's entire physical demeanor shifts from violently angry to incredibly desperate and submissive in a fraction of a second. He violently nudges Julian, and they both scramble forward away from me, frantically smoothing their wrinkled suit jackets and plastering on their absolute best fake professional networking smiles. They genuinely think Richard is here to save them. They actually believe he tracked them down at this lavish anniversary gala to personally deliver the incredibly good news that their massive loan has been approved and their rotting real estate empire will be saved from federal investigation. Mr. Vance Malcolm calls out loudly, stepping forward eagerly, with his hand outstretched to shake. What an absolutely incredible surprise to see you here tonight. Sir, please come join us at the head table and let us get you a drink. Julian follows right behind him, already bowing slightly and thanking Richard for taking the valuable time to come out and meet them in person. But Richard Vance does not even look at them. He does not take Malcolm's enthusiastically outstretched hand. He does not acknowledge Julian's desperate groveling greeting. He walks right past them, staring straight ahead, as if they are nothing but invisible, insignificant statues blocking his path. The sheer public disrespect leaves Malcolm and Julian standing there with their hands hanging awkwardly in the empty air, looking like absolute complete fools in front of the church congregation. Richard walks with long, purposeful strides across the polished ballroom floor, heading straight for the back of the room, where I am standing quietly watching the scene unfold. The entire remaining crowd watches in breathless, stunned silence. Richard stops exactly 2 feet in front of me. He squares his broad shoulders, clicks his heels together and bows deeply from the waist with profound, genuine respect. He opens his leather briefcase with a sharp click and pulls out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents printed on expensive, watermarked paper. He holds them out to me respectfully with both hands. "Madam CEO," he says, his deep, authoritative voice carrying perfectly across the dead silent ballroom so every single person can hear him clearly. The $15 million loan denial paperwork for Mr. Harrison's company is fully prepared and processed. It is ready for your final signature tonight. Absolute sheer visceral horror instantly paralyzes my entire family. My father's jaw drops so far it practically hits his chest as he grabs the back of his chair for support. Malcolm stumbles backward physically, tripping over his own feet as the color drains completely from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. Julian's pregnant wife lets out a loud, piercing gasp, clutching her stomach in pure, unadulterated shock. The room begins to spin violently for all of them. The realization hits them with the crushing, devastating force of a speeding freight train. The invisible billionaire. They have been desperately begging for money. The ruthless corporate executive who currently holds their freedom, their reputation, and their very lives in her hands, is the exact same woman they just threw out into the rain 3 years ago. The absolute silence in the ballroom is so heavy, it feels like the air has been sucked completely out of the room. My father Harrison stares at Richard Vance and then slowly shifts his terrified gaze to me. I can see the gears turning in his highly manipulative brain. He realizes that the $15 million lifeline he desperately needs to stay out of federal prison is resting entirely in the hands of the daughter he just allowed his family to violently humiliate. Harrison swallows hard. The arrogant, powerful pastor persona vanishes in an absolute instant. He takes a step toward me, holding his hands up in a gesture of total surrender. His voice shakes as he forces a warm, loving tone that makes my skin crawl. "Tara, my precious, beautiful daughter," he says, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness. I always told your mother that you had the brightest mind in this entire family." Brenda stands frozen next to him, her mouth hanging open as she watches her powerful husband completely fold. Harrison reaches out, attempting to take my hand, but I step back, allowing Richard Vance to smoothly position himself slightly between us. Harrison drops his hands but continues his pathetic, desperate performance. He tells me that Vanguard Estates is a massive blessing from God, and that I am the absolute savior of our bloodline. He drops his voice to a frantic whisper, begging me to think about our legacy. He says the Legacy Project is meant to elevate our entire community, and that as a successful Black woman, I have a sacred duty to uplift my family. He starts bringing up fake childhood memories, trying to manufacture a bond that never existed. He reminds me of how he bought me my first bicycle and how he supposedly prayed for my success every single night. My mother Brenda immediately joins the manipulation tactic. She forces large fake tears to well up in her eyes and step forward, claiming that the Bible commands a daughter to honor her mother and father. She tells me that God has placed me in this position of immense wealth specifically so I can rescue my family from their temporary burdens. Harrison aggressively nods along, telling me that Malcolm and Julian just made a few tiny mathematical errors in their corporate accounting. He promises that the $15 million loan is just a temporary bridge to keep the church out of unnecessary media scrutiny. He looks at the surrounding church elders who are watching this bizarre exchange with deep confusion and growing suspicion. Harrison tries to laugh it off, saying that family business can be messy, but blood is thicker than water. He practically gets on his knees right there on the polished hardwood floor, begging me to take the pen from Richard and sign the approval instead of the denial. He tells me I can have absolutely anything I want. He says I can sit at the head of the table tonight and every night. He says he will publicly apologize for any misunderstandings from the past if I just save their real estate empire from total collapse. I look at the man who shut the heavy oak door in my face while my children shivered in the freezing rain. I look at him weaponizing his religion and his fake parental love just to save his own skin. I slowly reach out and take the sleek silver pen from Richard's hand. Harrison's eyes light up with pure, desperate hope. He actually thinks he has won. He actually believes that his decades of psychological manipulation are still working on me. I hold the pen over the thick stack of denial paperwork. I look Harrison directly in his eyes and I tell him that I am not going to sign the approval. I tell him that I am going to sign the absolute destruction of his fake kingdom right here in front of his entire congregation. Harrison's fake, loving smile instantly shatters into a million pieces. His face twists into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Before he can say another word, I hand the pen back to Richard without signing anything. I turn my attention to Malcolm and Julian, who are cowering behind the elegant table like terrified rats. I tell the entire room that my company did not just audit their fake financial projections. I tell them that Vanguard Estates conducts extremely thorough background investigations on anyone asking for $15 million of our capital. I reach into my black leather portfolio and pull out a small digital audio recorder. I explain to my father that when his golden son and my ex-husband submitted their loan application, they unknowingly triggered a deep corporate investigation. I tell him that my security team placed a highly sensitive listening device in the main boardroom of their construction office to verify their daily business operations. Malcolm's eyes widen in sheer, undeniable terror. He grabs Julian's arm, his expensive rented tuxedo suddenly completely drenched in cold sweat. I press the play button on the small device and hold it up near the microphone of the ballroom sound system. The crystal-clear audio echoes through the massive decorated room. It is the unmistakable voice of my brother Malcolm. He is laughing aggressively on the tape. He is telling Julian that the old man referring to our father is completely blind to what is really happening behind closed doors. Malcolm's recorded voice explicitly states that as soon as Vanguard Estates wires the $15 million, they are going to immediately transfer the entire amount into a series of untraceable offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The entire ballroom gasps in unified horror. The elderly church members who trusted my father with their life savings stare in absolute shock. The tape continues to play, revealing exactly how depraved my brother and my ex-husband truly are. They explicitly joke about stealing from the church widows and orphans fund to pay for their luxury sports cars. Brother Thomas, an elderly deacon standing in the front row, drops his champagne glass. It shatters loudly on the floor as he realizes Malcolm is laughing about taking his entire retirement pension. The recording continues to play for everyone to hear. Julian's voice chimes in next. My ex-husband sounds incredibly smug and arrogant on the tape. He tells Malcolm that he has already forged Harrison's signature on all the church embezzlement documents. Julian explains perfectly clearly that when the federal tax auditors come knocking next month, all the digital evidence will point directly to Harrison. Julian laughs cruelly on the tape and says the pastor is going to spend the rest of his pathetic life rotting in a federal penitentiary while they sip expensive margaritas on a private tropical beach. He says Harrison is nothing but a useful idiot who handed them the keys to the church vault. The recording clicks off, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the country club. I drop the small black device back into my portfolio. I look at my father. His face has gone completely gray. The man who spent his entire life building a reputation based on holy righteousness and absolute control just heard his golden boy and his favorite son-in-law casually planning to frame him for a massive federal felony. He just heard them plotting to steal $15 million and leave him to rot in a prison cell. Julian and Malcolm are completely paralyzed with fear. Julian's pregnant new wife lets out a loud, hysterical sob and backs away from him, looking at him like he is an absolute monster. She realizes her perfect provider is actually a federal criminal who is about to lose everything. She turns and starts screaming at my sister Ebony, blaming Ebony for introducing her to this fraudulent loser. Ebony looks absolutely terrified, shrinking away from her best friend. Heather, my sister-in-law, covers her mouth with her hands, her silver sequined dress suddenly looking cheap and ridiculous, as she realizes her wealthy lifestyle is entirely based on a massive fraud, and she is about to be completely broke. My mother Brenda leans heavily against the table, clutching her chest as if she cannot breathe. The perfect, pristine image she sacrificed her own daughter to protect has just been violently ripped to shreds in front of the very people she tried so desperately to impress. I look at Julian and Malcolm and I tell them that Vanguard Estates does not fund cowardly criminals. I tell them that federal agents already have copies of that tape and the complete forensic audit of their stolen church accounts. I tell them they are completely, utterly finished. The dead silence in the ballroom is suddenly shattered by a sound I have never heard before in my entire life. It is a raw, guttural roar of pure, animalistic rage. The terrifying sound comes directly from my father, Harrison. The polished, respected pastor who always preached about peace and forgiveness completely snaps in front of hundreds of people. His eyes are wide and completely bloodshot. The veins in his neck are bulging intensely against his expensive silk collar. He realizes in one horrifying, agonizing moment that his golden son, the boy he chose over me, the boy he gave absolutely everything to, was actively planning to destroy him and throw him into a federal prison. Harrison lunges across the beautifully decorated head table. He does not even try to walk around it. He dives straight over the crystal champagne glasses and the imported floral arrangements. He tackles Malcolm with terrifying, brutal force. The massive table collapses under their combined weight, sending expensive china and half-eaten food crashing loudly to the hardwood floor. The entire room screams in absolute terror. Harrison wraps his large hands around Malcolm's throat, screaming that he gave him everything and that he is a worthless traitor. He grabs a heavy silver serving tray from the ruined table and smashes it blindly toward Malcolm's head. Malcolm chokes and flails wildly, punching his own father square in the face just to get him off. Julian panics and tries to crawl away on his hands and knees over the broken glass to escape the madness. But my brother Malcolm grabs Julian's tuxedo jacket, pulling him violently back down into the chaotic mess on the floor. Malcolm screams that the offshore accounts were entirely Julian's brilliant idea and that Julian forced him to do it. Julian punches Malcolm right in the jaw, screaming that Malcolm is a pathetic liar who ruined everything. The elegant 40th anniversary gala instantly devolves into a savage physical bloodbath. The three arrogant men who spent their lives acting superior to me are now rolling around on the floor in spilled champagne and shattered glass, beating each other mercilessly like wild dogs. Brenda is screaming hysterically, trying to pull Harrison off of Malcolm, but she slips on the wet floor and falls hard into the ruined anniversary cake. Heather is shrieking and hitting Julian with her expensive designer purse, crying about her ruined life. The wealthy church elders are shouting frantically for security, while local politicians scramble backward trying to avoid the flying fists and broken wooden chairs. Guests are pulling out their cell phones, recording the powerful pastor violently brawling with his family. The country club security guards rush into the ballroom, but they freeze in shock, too afraid to immediately intervene in such a savage fight between supposedly elite billionaires. In the distance, the faint but undeniable wail of police sirens begins to cut through the night air. Atlanta high society watches in absolute paralyzed horror as the perfect royal family literally tears each other limb from limb. Richard Vance steps quietly in front of me, shielding me from the flying debris and the utter chaos. I stand there in my emerald silk gown, perfectly calm, perfectly untouchable, watching their entire fake empire burn to the ground right in front of my eyes. I look down at the chaotic, violent mess of the people who threw me away, and I know this is only the beginning of their ultimate nightmare. The chaotic, violent mess on the floor suddenly stops when Heather unleashes a scream so loud it practically shatters the crystal chandeliers above us. Her silver sequined dress is torn at the hem, and her perfectly styled blonde hair is a wild, tangled mess. She drops her expensive designer purse and marches right into the middle of the broken glass and crushed flowers. She kicks Malcolm hard in the ribs, forcing him to roll away from my father. Malcolm gasps for air, looking up at his wife with pure terror in his eyes. Heather is hyperventilating. The realization of the audio tape has fully processed in her privileged brain. She points a shaking, manicured finger at Malcolm's bleeding face and screams that he is a disgusting, pathetic thief. The wealthy country club patrons watch in stunned, silent fascination as Heather publicly airs their dirtiest financial secrets. She tells the entire ballroom that Malcolm secretly mortgaged her family trust fund to cover his massive losses on the legacy project. She says he forged her signature on the banking documents, claiming it was just routine paperwork for a temporary business extension. Heather is absolutely sobbing now, her mascara running down her flushed face in thick black lines. She screams that she comes from generations of old money, that her family built their wealth over decades, and that this fake developer just burned her entire inheritance to the ground. The racial and classist superiority she always lorded over me has completely evaporated. She looks around the room at her wealthy country club friends, seeking their usual sympathy and support, but they all take a collective step back away from her. Nobody wants to be associated with a bankrupt fraud. Heather realizes in this exact terrifying moment that she is completely broke. The luxurious life she constantly used to look down on me, the endless shopping sprees, the country club memberships, the absolute pure white privilege she weaponized against me is entirely gone. She has absolutely nothing left. She looks at Malcolm, who is spitting blood onto the polished floor, and tells him she wants a divorce, effective immediately. She screams that she is calling her father's lawyers and that she will personally make sure Malcolm rots in a cell next to his father. The sheer panic in her voice is intoxicating. She turns to me, her eyes wild and desperate. She actually expects me to sympathize with her. She expects the black woman she just offered kitchen leftovers to suddenly play the supportive sister-in-law. She takes a step toward me, begging me to tell the Vanguard attorneys that she had nothing to do with the embezzlement. I just look at her with dead, silent eyes. I do not offer her a single word of comfort. I remind her that she told me to take deep breaths and stop playing the victim when I was standing in the freezing rain with my children. I suggest she take her own advice now. She is drowning in the exact same cold reality she threw me into 3 years ago, and I will not throw her a life preserver. Heather covers her face and collapses into a nearby chair, wailing uncontrollably as the reality of her new poverty sets in. My younger sister Ebony has been watching this entire scene unfold from the sidelines. She has always been a parasite, attaching herself to whoever had the most money and power in the room. Seeing Malcolm and Julian completely destroyed and Heather reduced to a sobbing mess, she realizes that the only person left standing with any real wealth is me. Ebony suddenly steps forward, stepping carefully over the broken china and spilled champagne. She puts on her best fake supportive sister face. She looks at Julian, who is still bleeding on the floor next to his horrified pregnant wife. Ebony starts loudly cursing Julian, calling him a toxic, manipulative liar. She tells the crowd that she always knew Julian was no good for me. She turns to me and tries to grab my hand, putting on a sickening display of fake sisterly solidarity. She tells me she is so incredibly proud of me for becoming the chief executive officer of Vanguard Estates. She says we are blood, and that sisters have to stick together when the men in the family lose their minds. She is actually trying to switch sides right in front of everyone, hoping I will invite her up to my penthouse and fund her lazy, pathetic lifestyle. Julian hears her desperate attempt to play the loyal sister, and he lets out a wet, hacking cough of a laugh. He struggles to his knees, holding his bruised jaw. He looks at Ebony with pure, absolute venom. He tells the entire room that Ebony is the biggest hypocrite in the building. Julian wipes blood from his mouth and points directly at my sister. He tells me not to believe a single word coming out of her lying mouth. Julian's pregnant wife, the woman who used to be Ebony's best friend, tries to shush him, but Julian is too far gone. He wants to take everyone down with him. He tells the silent ballroom that 3 years ago, when I was working myself to the bone to support our family, Ebony discovered his affair. But instead of telling me the truth, Ebony negotiated a payout. Julian laughs cruelly and reveals that he paid my own flesh and blood sister $50,000 in cash to keep her mouth shut. The crowd gasps again. Julian does not stop there. He exposes the fact that Ebony actively helped her best friend steal my husband. He says Ebony used that $50,000 to buy the designer bags and expensive shoes she is wearing right now. She sold her own sister out for a shopping spree. The absolute betrayal washes over me, but it does not break me. I look at Ebony, who is now shaking her head and frantically stepping backward. Her fake supportive smile has vanished, replaced by the stark naked fear of a cornered rat. She tries to deny it, but the guilt is painted all over her face. She stammers and cries, saying she only took the money because our parents cut off her allowance and she needed to survive. She begs me to understand that she was just trying to look out for herself. I look at the shoes she is wearing, the ones bought with the money Julian paid her to hide his betrayal. I tell her that she sold her soul for $50,000 and now she gets to live with the fact that she backed the wrong horse. My own sister took blood money to let them destroy my life, and now she has to watch me rule the city while she has absolutely nothing. I stand in the center of the ruined ballroom, watching the people who share my DNA completely tear each other apart. Malcolm is weeping on the floor, while Heather screams at him. Julian is fighting with his pregnant wife, and my sister Ebony is crying hysterically as the church elders stare at her with absolute disgust. My father Harrison is sitting on the floor, leaning against a broken chair, completely defeated and broken. They are a chaotic mess of greed and betrayal, and I am watching them drown in the very trap they set for themselves. My mother Brenda, who has been quiet since she fell into the anniversary cake, suddenly pushes herself up. Her expensive dress is covered in white frosting, and her hair is ruined. She refuses to accept that her perfect social image is dead. She looks at me with a wild, aggressive desperation. She stomps over the broken glass, completely ignoring her bleeding son and her broken husband. She gets right in my face, pointing her frosting-covered finger at my chest. She screams at me that I have the power to fix all of this. She orders me to use my billions to buy the legacy project right now. She says if I just buy the failing development, the church elders will get their money back, the federal investigators will go away, and our family honor will be saved. She tells me I owe it to them for all the years they raised me. She screams that I am acting like a selfish, ungrateful monster, while my family bleeds on the floor. I look at my mother. I look at the desperation and the sheer blinding entitlement in her eyes. I do not raise my voice. I just let a cold, dark smile spread across my face. I lean in close so she can see the absolute certainty in my eyes. I tell her that Vanguard Estates does not just evaluate distressed assets. We also acquire local zoning boards, construction permit offices, and supply chain logistics companies. I watch the confusion slowly wash over Brenda's face. I look around at Malcolm, Julian, and Harrison, who have all suddenly gone dead silent. I ask them a very simple question. I ask them why they think the legacy project has been mysteriously gridlocked for 2 entire years. I ask them why they think their construction permits kept getting denied and their supply chains kept getting mysteriously cut off. Their eyes widen in absolute pure horror as they finally realize the truth. I am the one who slowly starved their project to death, and I enjoyed every single second of it. The utter silence in the ballroom is deafening as my question hangs in the humid, heavily perfumed air. Why do you think your project has been gridlocked for 2 entire years? Malcolm is staring at me with a look of complete and utter bewilderment, his swollen, bleeding lip completely forgotten. My father, Harrison, is breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his ruined velvet suit as he tries to process what I just said. I slowly step over a shattered crystal vase and walk directly toward Malcolm until I am standing just inches away from him. I tell him that anyone who actually knows how to develop commercial real estate understands the fundamental concept of a keystone lot. I explain it to him slowly and deliberately, as if I am teaching a very slow child basic mathematics. The Legacy Project was supposed to be a massive, sprawling luxury complex, but its entire architectural design relied heavily on one specific piece of commercial land at the extreme southern edge of the property boundary. That single modest lot was the absolute only way to connect the city water lines, the underground fiber optics, and the main access road for the heavy construction equipment. Without that exact piece of dirt, the entire multi-million-dollar project was completely useless. I watch Malcolm's eyes widen in pure terror as his brain finally starts to connect the scattered pieces of his massive failure. I remind him of what happened exactly 24 months ago. He had finally secured the initial investors and was totally ready to break ground when the elderly owner of that southern lot suddenly decided to sell. Malcolm thought he had all the time in the world to buy it. He arrogantly assumed no one else would ever want a vacant, overgrown patch of weeds and dirt in that specific area. But then, an anonymous buyer swooped in out of nowhere and purchased the lot in pure, untraceable cash, paying double the asking price and closing the deal in 48 hours. Malcolm actually stumbles backward, hitting the edge of the broken table as I speak. His voice shakes violently as he whispers that he spent the last 2 years trying desperately to find out who bought that land. He spent tens of thousands of dollars hiring private investigators and ruthless corporate lawyers, trying to force the anonymous owner to sell or lease the property. He explains to the horrified church elders that the phantom buyer completely ignored every single astronomical offer, every aggressive legal threat, and every pathetic, desperate plea. Because that land sat empty, the Legacy Project could not lay a single pipe or pour a single foundation. The city rapidly revoked their building permits because the vital access roads were blocked. The original contractors walked away, taking their massive non-refundable deposits with them. The holding costs skyrocketed, bleeding their corporate accounts completely dry month after agonizing month. Malcolm looks at me with thick tears of absolute terror forming in his eyes. He realizes that he spent the last 2 years screaming into the dark void, cursing a faceless ghost who was actively strangling his greatest achievement to death. I look him dead in the eye, and I tell him that I am the phantom buyer. I tell him that while he was sitting in his expensive country club, drinking imported scotch and laughing about how he threw his sister into the street, I was sitting in my penthouse office, holding the deed to the only piece of land that mattered. I watched his company bleed to death on my financial monitors. I watched him grow so desperate that he eventually decided to illegally mortgage his white wife's family trust fund. I watched him grow so incredibly panicked that he finally agreed to help my ex-husband Julian steal $15 million from the church congregation just to cover the massive catastrophic losses that I personally engineered. Malcolm falls to his knees in the broken glass, weeping uncontrollably, as the entire room realizes that his magnificent business empire was destroyed by the very woman he threw a crumpled $100 bill at. My mother Brenda suddenly screams my name, her voice cracking with pure hysterical rage. Her beautiful, expensive dress is heavily covered in white frosting, and her hair is completely ruined, but her toxic pride refuses to die. She points a shaking, manicured finger right at my face. She demands to know how I could possibly afford to buy commercial real estate in pure, untraceable cash. She screams that I was completely broke, that I was a pathetic, dependent wife who had absolutely nothing to her name when Julian kicked me out. She yells that I must have stolen the money or committed some kind of massive corporate fraud to build Vanguard Estates. She looks around at the remaining country club guests and the horrified church elders desperately trying to spin a new narrative where I am the ruthless criminal and she is the innocent victim. I do not raise my voice or show any emotion. I just look at her with a calm, dead expression. I tell her to take a walk down memory lane with me. I ask her if she remembers exactly what happened 3 years ago, just 1 month before Julian threw me out into the rain. I remind her of the day she forced me to come over and clean out her dark, damp basement so she could make room for her new, incredibly expensive catalog furniture. Brenda's face goes completely blank as she tries to remember the specific mundane chore. I decide to jog her memory. I remind her of the 3 large, heavy canvases covered in thick layers of ugly modern paint and terrible grime. I remind her of exactly what she said when she pointed her finger at them with pure, absolute disgust. She told me to throw them in the dumpster immediately. She called them cheap black ghetto trash that ruined the elegant, wealthy aesthetic of her newly renovated mansion. I watch the color rapidly drain from her face as the realization begins to take a terrifying shape. I tell her that my professional instincts as an antique appraiser kicked in that exact day. The canvas material felt unusually heavy and incredibly old. So instead of throwing her so-called trash into the dumpster, I secretly placed those canvases in the trunk of my car and put them in my hallway closet. I tell her that on the exact same miserable night, she and my father shut their heavy oak door in my face and left me to freeze in the torrential rain. I sat on the floor of a cheap, run-down motel room and used a specialized solvent to clean away the top layer of that ugly paint. I tell the entire silent ballroom what was hiding underneath. 3 authentic lost masterpieces from one of the most legendary African-American artists of the Harlem Renaissance. Paintings that had been missing for over 70 years. Paintings that were worth a profound, unimaginable fortune. I tell my mother that the very next morning, while she was sitting at her expensive dining table drinking coffee and pretending her daughter did not exist, I was sitting in a highly secure private auction house. I tell her that I sold her black ghetto trash to a private international collector for exactly $3,500,000 in pure, untraceable funds. Brenda lets out a sound that is half gasp and half scream. She clutches her chest as if she is having a physical heart attack. The poetic justice of the situation crashes down on her head like a heavy iron anvil. Her desperate obsession with modern wealthy status, her deeply internalized racism against her own culture, and her absolute vicious cruelty toward her own daughter cost her an unimaginable fortune. I tell her that I took the millions of dollars from her discarded trash, and I used it to buy the Southern Keystone lot. I literally used the garbage she threw away to bankrupt her husband, destroy her golden son, and burn her fake empire straight to the ground. The entire country club is so quiet you can hear the soft hum of the air conditioning vents. Brenda staggers backward, falling into the arms of a horrified church deacon, completely broken by the crushing weight of her own monumental stupidity. I slowly open my black leather portfolio one last time. The soft click of the metal clasp echoes loudly in the tense, silent room. I reach inside and pull out a thick, heavy document printed on crisp legal paper. It bears the official raised gold seal of the city-county clerk. It is the original property deed for the Southern Keystone lot, perfectly registered under the corporate holding proxy of Vanguard Estates. I step forward and drop the deed directly onto the center of the ruined table, right on top of a crushed floral arrangement and a spilled bowl of expensive caviar. The heavy paper lands with a soft, definitive thud. It is the physical, undeniable proof of my absolute ownership and their total, inescapable demise. It is the final rusty nail driven straight into the coffin of their fake royalty. The exact moment the deed hits the table, my ex-husband Julian completely breaks. The smug, arrogant chief financial officer who strutted around this ballroom just an hour ago mocking my clothes and laughing about my supposed poverty shatters into a million pathetic pieces. He drops to his knees right in the middle of the spilled champagne and the jagged shards of broken crystal glasses. He does not care that his expensive tailored tuxedo pants are soaking up the sticky mess. He does not care that his new pregnant wife is staring at him with pure, unadulterated revulsion. He starts sobbing loudly, his chest heaving with desperate, ugly tears. He crawls forward on his knees over the ruined floor until he is right at my feet. He reaches out with shaking hands and desperately grabs the dark emerald silk hem of my gown. He looks up at me, his face covered in sweat and tears and pure absolute terror. He begs me for mercy. He cries out that he was wrong, that he made a terrible mistake, and that he never should have betrayed me or underestimated my worth. But then he plays the absolute most disgusting card he has left in his pathetic deck. He looks up into my cold, dead eyes and brings up our children. He begs me to think about Miles and Leah. He cries out that for the sake of our two beautiful kids, I simply cannot do this to him. He screams that Miles and Leah need their father, and that if I do not sign the $15 million loan approval, the Federal Bureau of Investigation will take him away and he will rot in a maximum security prison. He begs me not to take a father away from his innocent children. I look down at the weak, sobbing man grabbing my dress. The exact same man who kicked those exact same children out into a dangerous, freezing storm so he could sleep with his mistress. And the scene completely freezes on his pathetic, weeping face as I prepare my final answer. I look down at his perfectly manicured hands, gripping the delicate, dark emerald silk of my dress like a drowning man clutching a fragile life raft. He actually has the absolute audacity to weaponize the names of our children to save his own pathetic skin. I stare at the tears streaming down his face, mixing with the blood from his busted lip, and I feel absolutely nothing but profound, overwhelming disgust. You dare speak their names? I ask, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that forces him to physically flinch. You sit there on your knees, in a custom-tailored tuxedo, begging me not to take a father away from Miles and Leah, as if you have been a father to them for a single second of the last 3 years. Julian stammers, his grip tightening on my dress, claiming that he loves them, that he was just waiting for the legacy project to finally close so he could set up a massive trust fund for their future. He cries out that his assets were completely tied up in corporate escrow, and he just did not have the liquid cash to send me. I let out a short, harsh laugh that cuts right through his pathetic lies. I tell the entire silent room that this wealthy executive, this man who just tried to order a $3,000 bottle of champagne on a fraudulent credit card, has not paid a single solitary cent of his court-ordered child support in exactly 36 months. The wealthy country club guests murmur in absolute revulsion. I remind Julian of the nights I stayed awake holding Miles while he cried from a severe fever because I could not afford the expensive copay for his asthma medication. I remind him of how I begged him for just $200 to buy Leah a winter coat, and he completely ignored my messages while posting pictures of his luxury vacation to the Bahamas with his new mistress. He abandoned his own flesh and blood in a freezing rainstorm and never once looked back to see if they survived the night. He is not a father. He is a biological donor who is only desperately claiming them now as a human shield because he is absolutely terrified of federal prison. Julian's pregnant wife puts her hands over her ears, sobbing hysterically as she realizes the man she married is a deadbeat who starved his own children to fund her designer lifestyle. Julian drops his head to the floor, weeping loudly, apologizing over and over again. But his apologies are entirely worthless to me now. I take a deliberate step back, forcing Julian to release his sweaty grip on my gown. I tell him to stop crying because the child support evasion is the absolute least of his impending legal problems. Julian freezes, his tear-streaked face slowly looking up at me with a new, fresh wave of sheer terror. Malcolm, who is still bleeding on the floor nearby, suddenly goes perfectly rigid. I reach back into my black leather portfolio, and the sound of the crisp paper sliding out makes both of them physically violently flinch. Vanguard Estates does not simply audit the current $15 million application. I explain to the crowd, my voice carrying with absolute crystal-clear authority. Our underwriters conduct a completely exhaustive forensic investigation of the entire financial history of the borrowing company. I pull out a thick stack of legal documents bound in a red folder and hold it up for them to see. I explain that when my corporate security team pulled the original foundational loan documents that Malcolm and Julian used to secure their very first round of seed money 2 years ago, they found something incredibly interesting in the guarantor section. I looked directly into Malcolm's wide, terrified eyes and then down at Julian's trembling face. Did you arrogant, foolish men really think I would never find out you forged my signature on a federal banking document? I ask. The collective gasp in the ballroom is so loud it sounds like a vacuum. My mother, Brenda, lets out a weak, pathetic whimper as she realizes the sheer magnitude of the crime. I explained to the room that 2 years ago, when I was allegedly a destitute single mother digging through trash, they illegally used my pristine credit history and my name to co-sign a massive commercial loan. They literally stole my identity the moment they kicked me out of the family, assuming I would be too poor and too broken to ever hire a lawyer and discover the truth. I dropped the forensic handwriting report directly onto the floor right in front of Julian's face. I tell them that independent forensic graphologists have absolutely confirmed the digital manipulation and the blatant forgery. Julian begins shaking so violently, his teeth are actually chattering. Malcolm lets out a hollow wheezing sound as the reality of his impending doom finally crushes the last remaining breath out of his lungs. Heather lets out another piercing scream, clutching her hair, realizing her husband is not just bankrupt, but a serial felon who committed identity theft against his own sister. I tell Julian and Malcolm that forging a signature on a commercial banking loan crossing state lines to secure federal funds and defrauding a major financial institution is not a simple state-level misdemeanor that my father can quietly sweep under the rug with a quick bribe to the local judge. It is a direct violation of federal wire fraud statutes. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The entire foundation of their fake wealth, their arrogance, their country club memberships, and their luxury cars was entirely built on a massive federal crime committed against their own discarded blood. They are looking at decades behind bars, and absolutely nothing can save them now. The absolute devastating finality of my words finally breaks the last remaining shred of my father's sanity. Harrison realizes in one blinding flash of pure, horrific clarity that his entire legacy is completely dead. His church will be seized by federal auditors. His golden son is going to federal prison. His son-in-law is a fraud, and his own reputation will be dragged through the mud on every single national news network. He will be remembered as the corrupt pastor who raised criminals. He snaps. A raw, terrifying, animalistic roar rips from his throat. He scrambles up from the floor, violently shoving Brenda aside so hard she stumbles into a waiter. He lunges directly toward me, his eyes completely unhinged with desperate madness. He reaches wildly for the leather portfolio in my hands, screaming that I am a demon sent from hell to test him. He shouts that he will not let me ruin the family name, that he will burn the forged documents and the audio tapes right here in the middle of the ballroom to protect his holy empire. I do not even flinch. I do not take a single step backward. Before Harrison can even get within 3 feet of me, Richard Vance steps forward with the smooth, practiced speed of a trained corporate executive. Richard effortlessly blocks the older, desperate man, catching Harrison's arm and twisting it back just enough to completely immobilize him, holding the disgraced pastor firmly in place. Harrison thrashes and spits, screaming violently for me to give him the papers, begging and cursing in the exact same breath. I just stand there perfectly still, perfectly untouchable. I slowly lift my wrist and casually check the time on my heavy custom titanium designer watch. I look into my father's wild, manic eyes, and I smile the coldest, most empty smile of my entire life. I tell him he is about 48 hours too late to burn anything. I inform him that my legal team already submitted the original audio recordings, the forensic handwriting analysis, and the complete corporate audit directly to the federal authorities on Wednesday morning. The entire ballroom suddenly falls dead silent as my words sink in. And then right on cue, a faint sound begins to drift through the heavy paneled glass windows of the luxurious country club. It starts as a distant, high-pitched wail cutting sharply through the humid night air. Then another joins it, then 5 more. The sound grows rapidly louder, transforming into a deafening, terrifying chorus of aggressive police sirens. The heavy rumbling roar of massive armored federal vehicles can be heard tearing up the long, expensive gravel driveway of the estate. The vibrant, violent flashing of red and blue emergency lights begins to bounce frantically against the grand ballroom walls, painting the terrified faces of my family in the colors of their absolute inescapable doom. I look down at Julian's tear-stained face, his hands trembling violently as he clutches the silk of my gown, begging for a mercy he never once showed me or our children. I gently pry his sweaty fingers off my dress, one by one, stepping back so he falls forward onto the polished floor. I tell him that Miles and Leah already lost their father the night he locked us out in the freezing rain, and that I will not let his cowardly crimes infect their future. Before Julian can open his mouth to beg again, the massive mahogany double doors of the country club ballroom are violently shoved open. The heavy wood crashes loudly against the paneled walls, sending a shockwave through the room. The deafening wail of sirens outside is suddenly matched by the overwhelming presence of over a dozen federal agents flooding into the room. They are wearing dark tactical gear with the letters FBI boldly printed across their vests. Their boots hit the hardwood floor in perfect, terrifying unison. The entire room erupts into a chorus of panicked gasps and shrieks. The wealthy country club guests, the local politicians, and the esteemed church elders immediately scatter, backing away from the head table as if it is infected with a deadly plague. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern, uncompromising face, steps right past the shattered crystal and the ruined anniversary cake. He points a firm, authoritative finger directly at my brother Malcolm and my ex-husband Julian. He announces in a booming voice that completely silences the room that they are both being placed under federal arrest for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and massive financial conspiracy. Malcolm tries to run. My golden brother, the brilliant real estate developer who always acted like a king, takes one look at the federal agents and actually tries to scramble backward like a terrified animal. He slips violently on the spilled champagne and crashes face first into a broken wooden chair. 2 agents are on him in a fraction of a second. They grab his arms, twisting them roughly behind his back and slamming him down onto the floor. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping around Malcolm's wrists echoes through the dead, silent ballroom. Julian does not even try to run. He just stays on his knees, sobbing hysterically, covering his face with his hands as an agent hauls him up by his ruined tuxedo jacket and violently cuffs his hands behind his back. The lead agent stands right over them and loudly reads them their Miranda rights, his voice projecting across the massive room, ensuring every single person hears exactly what is happening. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The words hit my family like physical blows. My mother Brenda is screaming uncontrollably, covering her face as she watches her golden son being treated like a common street criminal. The church elders are whispering furiously among themselves, pointing at Malcolm and Julian with pure disgust. They realize that the sacred funds they donated for the community have been stolen by the very men they trusted. Local news reporters who were gathered outside waiting to cover the elite anniversary gala have managed to push their way through the shattered front entrance. Their heavy cameras are flashing relentlessly, capturing every single humiliating second of Malcolm and Julian being paraded in handcuffs. The bright white flashes of the cameras illuminate the absolute terror on my brother's face. He tries to hide his face from the lenses, but an agent firmly pushes his head up, forcing him to look directly at the cameras. The men who spent their entire lives protecting their pristine public image are now going to be plastered across the front page of every morning newspaper in Atlanta. The sheer public spectacle is absolutely devastating. They are stripped of their arrogance, their fake wealth, and their unearned privilege in a matter of seconds. Reporters are shoving microphones into their faces, shouting questions about the stolen church funds and the forged bank documents. The chaos is absolute. The agents drag the two men who tried to ruin my life toward the exit, their shiny black dress shoes slipping on the wet floor. Julian looks back at me one last time, his eyes pleading for salvation, but I just give him a slow, cold nod of farewell. They wanted to steal millions and live like kings in the Caymans, but instead they are being shoved into the back of a cold steel federal transport van while the entire city watches their total humiliating destruction. The sweet taste of absolute justice fills the room as the heavy doors close behind them, leaving a trail of shattered egos and ruined reputations. While the agents are clearing out Malcolm and Julian, Heather desperately tries to fade into the background. She slowly backs away toward the lavish dessert buffet, wiping her running mascara and frantically attempting to smooth down her torn silver-sequined dress. She truly believes that because she comes from generations of old white money, the rules simply do not apply to her. She assumes she can just quietly exit the ballroom, call her father's powerful corporate lawyers, and completely erase herself from this disgusting, messy family drama. But federal investigators are incredibly thorough, and they do not care about her country club memberships or her inherited wealth. A female FBI agent steps directly into Heather's path, completely blocking her escape route. The agent asks if she is Heather Wilson, the primary financial beneficiary of the Wilson Legacy Trust. Heather instantly puffs out her chest, trying to summon her usual arrogant entitlement. She lifts her chin and loudly declares that she is a victim in all of this, and that her foolish husband Malcolm secretly mortgaged her family trust fund without her permission. She demands that the agent step aside immediately so she can go home to her pristine mansion. The agent does not move an inch. Instead, she pulls out a thick manila folder and flips it open. The agent informs Heather in a voice cold enough to freeze water that the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the exact same accounts designated to receive the $15 million of stolen church funds, are entirely registered under Heather's maiden name. Heather gasps, her face draining of all color, turning an absolute sickly shade of pale gray. The agent continues explaining that the banking documents explicitly require a verified biometric signature to open those specific international accounts, and that Heather's personal signature and fingerprint match the documents perfectly. Heather did not just have her trust fund secretly mortgaged by Malcolm. She actively and willingly participated in the massive money laundering scheme. She happily signed the offshore paperwork because she wanted those stolen millions just as desperately as Malcolm did. The realization that she is completely caught shatters her arrogant facade into a million pathetic pieces. She starts screaming hysterically, stamping her expensive designer heels on the floor like a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum. She cries out that there has been a terrible mistake, that she comes from a respectable family, and that women like her do not go to federal prison. She points wildly at me, demanding that the agents arrest me instead, calling me a liar and a thief. The female agent simply shakes her head, grabs Heather's arm and swiftly spins her around. The sound of a third pair of handcuffs clicking shut rings out across the stunned ballroom. Heather lets out a piercing shriek of sheer, unadulterated panic as the cold steel locks around her delicate wrists. The media cameras that had just finished photographing Malcolm and Julian immediately pivot their blinding flashes toward Heather. The heiress who spent her entire life looking down on people like me, treating me like absolute garbage because of the color of my skin and my financial struggles, is now forced to do the ultimate walk of shame. The agents escort her through the center of the ballroom. Her tears ruin her expensive makeup, leaving dark, ugly streaks across her pale face. The flashing cameras capture every humiliating second of her public downfall. She tries to hide her face behind her cuffed hands, but the relentless media captures it all. Her wealthy friends, the ones she drank champagne with just an hour ago, are actively pulling out their phones to record her being hauled away by federal authorities. Her white privilege, her old money inheritance, and her absolute toxic arrogance have completely failed to protect her from the severe consequences of her own blinding greed. She is escorted out the front doors sobbing and screaming into the night, heading straight toward the exact same federal transport vans as the men she thought she was better than. The ballroom is an absolute war zone of broken glass, overturned tables, and deeply traumatized guests. The police sirens continue to wail outside, casting a harsh spinning light through the tall windows. My father, Harrison, is still being restrained by Richard Vance, his chest heaving, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He watches his golden son, his son-in-law, and his wealthy daughter-in-law get dragged out like common criminals. He thinks the nightmare is finally over and that he can somehow salvage his precious reputation by playing the innocent, betrayed pastor. He slowly tries to straighten his ruined velvet suit coat, attempting to gather whatever microscopic shred of dignity he has left. He looks at the remaining church elders who are staring at him with deep suspicion and profound anger. He opens his mouth to speak to begin spinning his web of lies and religious manipulation. But before a single word escapes his lips, a quiet, severe-looking man steps out from the crowd of frightened church members. The man is wearing a simple gray suit and carries a thick leather briefcase. He is the regional financial inspector for the National Church Oversight Board, the highest governing authority that oversees Harrison's congregation. The inspector walks slowly toward my father, his face an absolute mask of professional disgust. He loudly announces that effective immediately, Harrison is permanently stripped of his pastoral duties and completely removed from the church board. He opens his briefcase and pulls out a formal legal injunction. He states that, due to the massive scale of the embezzlement, the forged corporate loans, and the horrific public scandal, the Oversight Board has officially secured a federal freeze order on every single one of Harrison's personal and professional assets. His bank accounts, his retirement funds, the luxury cars, and the massive mansion are all completely locked down, pending a full criminal investigation. The inspector tells Harrison that he is absolutely destitute and that the church will be cooperating fully with the federal authorities to ensure he faces severe prosecution for criminal negligence and gross financial mismanagement. The words hit Harrison like a freight train. The one single thing he valued above absolutely everything else in the universe, more than his wife, more than his children, more than his own soul, was his pristine, untouchable public reputation and his immense wealth. He watches that reputation instantly vaporize into thin air. His eyes bulge out of his head, and his skin turns a terrifying shade of purple. He clutches his chest with both hands, his fingers digging desperately into his velvet suit. He starts hyperventilating violently, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. A mild heart attack brought on by pure uncontrollable panic grips his body. His knees completely buckle beneath him, and he collapses heavily into a broken wooden chair, groaning in sheer physical and mental agony. Brenda rushes to his side, screaming for someone to call an ambulance, her perfect life totally destroyed. I stand there in the center of the beautiful ruined room, completely untouched by the chaos. I look at the pathetic broken man gasping for air in the chair. I slowly and casually lift my arm, checking my custom titanium watch. The deafening sound of police and federal sirens continues to wail outside the country club windows. A perfect, beautiful symphony, marking the absolute end of their reign. A perfect, beautiful symphony marking the absolute end of their reign. The heavy mahogany doors crash open again as the paramedics finally rush into the ballroom, pushing their way past the stunned remaining country club guests and the furious church elders who are still murmuring about the stolen millions. They quickly load my gasping, sputtering father onto a medical stretcher, his hands still clutching his chest in a blind, animalistic panic as his pristine reputation evaporates before his very eyes. He looks small and pathetic, stripped of his custom suits, and his booming pulpit voice reduced to a wheezing old man facing the absolute destruction of his entire fake holy empire. Brenda immediately tries to follow the paramedics, acting the part of the devoted, deeply worried wife, but the church financial inspector steps directly into her path, blocking her escape. He holds up a cold, flat hand and tells her she is absolutely not permitted to accompany him in the private medical transport because the ambulance is officially being escorted by federal authorities as part of an active criminal investigation. Brenda demands to know how she is supposed to get to the hospital, to be by her husband's side, acting as if she still holds any power or authority in this room. The inspector looks at her with a face carved out of solid ice and informs her that her transportation is no longer his concern or the concern of the church board. He explains in a loud, clear voice that carries across the silent, ruined ballroom that the two luxury SUVs parked in the VIP valet lot, the exact same vehicles she and Ebony drove here tonight to show off their fake wealth, are technically registered as church property. He tells her that because all church assets and corporate holdings are currently under strict federal lockdown, the federal agents have already instructed the valets to hand over the keys for immediate impound. Brenda's face twists into a mask of pure, unfiltered outrage, her perfectly structured features contorting into something truly ugly and desperate. She turns to my sister Ebony, who has been standing completely frozen in the corner the entire night, her golden child status rendered entirely useless in the face of a massive federal wire fraud investigation. Ebony is shivering in her thin, expensive designer gown, her perfectly styled hair falling flat and lifeless around her panicked face as she realizes her luxurious life is entirely over. Brenda aggressively orders Ebony to pull out her phone to call a premium private car service and to book them a luxury suite at the Ritz-Carlton downtown immediately so they can escape this humiliating nightmare and figure out a legal strategy. Ebony frantically fumbles with her device, her hands shaking so violently she almost drops the expensive phone onto the ruined polished floor covered in broken glass and spilled caviar. She quickly opens her banking applications to transfer the funds, and the blood instantly drains from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified hollow ghost staring into the abyss. She stammers out a weak, pathetic cry that every single one of her accounts is showing a negative balance or a bright red federal freeze notification. She tells Brenda that her personal trust fund, her daily checking accounts, her emergency credit cards, and her offshore reserves are all completely locked down by the Federal Bureau of Investigation because they were hopelessly entangled in Malcolm's massive money laundering web. Brenda snatches the phone directly from Ebony's, trembling hands staring at the glowing red zero balances in absolute pure disbelief, unable to comprehend that she is truly penniless. The country club manager, a man who spent the entire evening bowing and scraping to my family, trying to secure their future lucrative business, suddenly approaches them flanked by two very large, intimidating security guards. His obsequious, flattering smile is completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer, utter contempt as he looks at the women who just brought federal agents into his elite establishment. He looks at the shattered crystal glasses, the ruined expensive champagne, the overturned floral arrangements, and the sheer devastation of his grand, elegant ballroom. He informs Brenda that since the church corporate accounts are frozen, they are now personally legally liable for the $50,000 catering bill and the extensive property damage caused by the sudden federal raid. When Brenda starts weeping and hysterically claiming she has absolutely no access to any funds, the manager coldly instructs his security guards to escort the two women off the premises immediately without giving them a chance to collect their thoughts. He tells them loud enough for the remaining horrified guests to hear that his elite country club does not harbor federal criminals or tolerate destitute deadbeats who cannot pay their tabs. The heavy muscular guards grab Brenda and Ebony by their bare arms, completely ignoring their hysterical shrieks and their loud, entitled demands to be treated with the respect they believe they deserve. They physically drag my mother and my sister through the lavish lobby, past the whispering, pointing guests, and shove them straight out the heavy glass front doors into the brutal, unforgiving winter night. The temperature outside has plummeted well below freezing, turning the world into a harsh, icy wasteland. A bitter, cutting wind howls fiercely across the icy asphalt of the parking lot, slicing right through their delicate, thin silk dresses like a million tiny invisible blades. They have no winter coats, no luxury cars, no hidden money, and absolutely no access to the sprawling suburban mansion they always thought they owned. They are completely and utterly destitute, standing on the freezing pavement, shivering uncontrollably, as the valets actively ignore their pleas for help, and the security guards firmly lock the heavy front doors right in their faces, leaving them abandoned in the dark. I walk out of the country club a few minutes later, moving slowly and deliberately, enjoying every single second of the quiet, satisfying aftermath of my perfect, absolute victory. The heavy glass doors slide open for me, and the freezing winter night air hits my face, but I do not feel the bitter cold at all. I feel a profound, radiating warmth spreading deep through my entire chest, wrapping my heart in a blanket of pure, undeniable justice. A valet rushes forward with a deeply respectful bow and gently drapes my heavy, dark, tailored wool coat over my shoulders, treating me like the absolute royalty they pretended to be. I pull the thick, warm fabric around myself, breathing in the crisp, clean air of a world that I finally, completely, and entirely control. As I begin to walk across the sprawling, empty VIP parking lot, listening to the faint, distant wail of the police sirens carrying my enemies away, the sharp, frantic clicking of high heels echoes desperately across the icy pavement behind me. I hear someone running wildly, slipping and sliding dangerously on the frozen ground, gasping for breath in the thin winter air. Brenda suddenly throws herself directly into my path, physically blocking my way to my vehicle with her trembling, freezing body. Her face is a complete, absolute disaster of running dark makeup and blotchy red skin, completely stripped of the elegant, wealthy facade she spent decades carefully cultivating. Her teeth are chattering so violently she can barely form a coherent sentence, and her entire frame shakes with deep, uncontrollable spasms of cold. Ebony is standing a few feet behind her, wrapping her thin, bare arms around her own chest, weeping silently as her bare, freezing feet bleed into her expensive, strappy designer heels, staining the ice beneath her. Brenda realizes that her usual anger and intimidation will not work anymore on the woman who just dismantled her entire reality, so she drops the arrogant mask she wore just an hour ago and instantly puts on the face of a desperate, loving, heartbroken mother. She reaches out with freezing, shaking hands and tries to grab my arm, hoping to find some lingering emotional connection, but I take a slow, deliberate step backward, leaving her grabbing at empty, freezing air. She looks up at me with wide, terrified eyes, and the thick tears pouring down her face are actually real for the very first time in her entire miserable life. But they are tears of pure, selfish panic and raw self-preservation, not remorse. Tara, please, you have to listen to me. She begs, her voice cracking and whining pitifully in the harsh winter wind as she hugs her own shivering shoulders. I always loved you. I swear to God, I always loved you more than anything in this entire world, and everything I did was for you. She tells me that every single terrible, vicious thing she ever did to me was just her unique, complicated way of making me incredibly strong and preparing me for a harsh reality. She spins a sickening, pathetic narrative right there on the ice, claiming that she always knew I had profound greatness inside me, and that she only pushed me away so I would learn exactly how to stand on my own 2 feet and conquer the world without needing anyone else. She cries out that she was just being a tough, strict mother because she knew the business world was a cruel, unforgiving place, and she desperately wanted me to be an unstoppable warrior who could never be broken by lesser men. She actually points a shaking blue finger back at her precious golden child Ebony and says that she only spoiled my sister because Ebony was hopelessly weak and pathetic. But she knew I was destined for an unimaginable fortune and total independence. It is the absolute most disgusting maternal manipulation I have ever witnessed in my entire existence, standing there watching her try to rewrite our dark history. She is actively standing there on the freezing asphalt, desperately trying to rebrand 3 decades of vicious psychological abuse, deep racial colorism, and blatant deliberate neglect as some kind of noble, brilliant maternal sacrifice done entirely for my own benefit. She is actively trying to convince me that throwing me out into a freezing, violent rainstorm 3 years ago, when I had absolutely nothing to. My name was actually an act of profound foundational love, designed exclusively to build my character and test my resolve. She falls hard to her knees on the jagged ice, completely ruining her expensive silk dress, looking up at me like a starving beggar pleading for a scrap of bread. Tara, please let me and your sister into your car, she wails hysterically, rubbing her freezing arms as the wind whips her ruined hair across her tear-stained face. We have absolutely nothing left because the federal agents took the cars and the manager threw us out into the cold, dark night without even letting us grab our purses. We will freeze to death out here. Tara, please, we have nowhere to go tonight, and we are so incredibly cold and frightened. I look down at her kneeling on the frozen ground, her entire fake identity completely stripped away, leaving absolutely nothing but a hollow, desperate, shivering shell of a woman who traded her soul for money. I listen to her toxic, transparent lies and her pathetic, desperate excuses, and I search my soul for even a single microscopic drop of pity or sympathy or lingering familial obligation. I search the deepest corners of my heart looking for the little girl who just wanted her mother to love her, but I find absolutely nothing but a vast, endless, peaceful emptiness, confirming that they mean absolutely nothing to me anymore. I do not say a single word to her, refusing to give her the satisfaction of an argument or the closure of an explanation. I simply reach into my deep, warm coat pocket and press a small silver button on my sleek keys. Right behind Brenda, the massive, brilliant headlights of a pristine, custom black Rolls-Royce Phantom suddenly flash to life, cutting brilliantly through the dark, freezing night like a beacon of absolute triumph. The heavy, immaculate doors unlock with a soft, satisfying premium click that echoes beautifully across the empty, frozen lot, signaling my total victory over their pathetic existence. I step gracefully around my weeping, shivering mother, leaving her kneeling helplessly on the ice, and I walk directly to the rear passenger door of the magnificent vehicle without looking back. I pull the polished silver handle, and the heavy armored door swings wide open, revealing a beautiful private world of pure, absolute warmth and perfect, impenetrable safety. The interior cabin glows with soft, ambient golden lighting, illuminating the flawless cream leather and the rich, polished wood accents that detail the luxurious space. The heated seats radiate a comforting sanctuary against the bitter winter cold outside, offering a haven that I built entirely with my own hands and my own brilliant mind. Buckled safely and happily in the back are my 2 beautiful, incredible children, Miles and Leah, who are completely shielded from the ugly, toxic drama unfolding in the parking lot. They are wearing warm, cozy knit sweaters, their sweet, innocent faces lit up with pure, unfiltered joy as they play a quiet, cooperative game together on a digital tablet, completely unaware of the monsters shivering outside. Sitting right next to them in the spacious cabin is David, The kind, strong, incredibly supportive man who stood faithfully by my side every single day for the last 3 years while I built my massive empire from the absolute ground up. He looks at me with warm, dark eyes full of absolute unconditional love and profound, deep pride, knowing exactly what I just accomplished inside that building. He reaches out a warm, solid, gentle hand to help me into the luxury vehicle, his presence a constant, steady anchor in my beautiful new life. I pause for just 1 second, standing in the open doorway, feeling the beautiful, perfect heat radiating from the safe cabin washing over my cold face. I slowly turn my head and look back over my shoulder at Brenda and Ebony, who are staring at the glowing, warm interior of the Rolls-Royce with expressions of absolute starving, utter desperation. They are shivering violently, their teeth chattering loudly, their lips turning a sickly shade of blue, watching my perfect, happy, secure family bathed in the beautiful warm light that they will never, ever be allowed to touch. I looked dead into Brenda's terrified, pleading, tear-filled eyes, watching the absolute realization crush her spirit completely as she sees the magnificent kingdom I built from the ashes she left me in. I let the heavy, profound silence hang in the freezing air for one heavy, endless final moment, letting the total weight of her catastrophic failure settle deep into her bones. Then I deliver the exact same words she spat at me on that miserable rainy night 3 years ago, when she locked the door in my face and told me to die in the street. There is no space, try Uber. I step into the luxurious back seat and slam the heavy armored door, completely shutting them out of my world forever, and my driver slowly pulls away, leaving them in the frozen dark to face the absolute ruin they built for themselves. The days and the months following that freezing night at the country club moved with swift and brutal justice. The federal investigation into Vanguard Estates and the church financial accounts uncovered a massive, highly coordinated web of deceit that completely took down half of the church board of directors. Julian and Malcolm did not even have the liquid funds to mount a proper legal defense. Their expensive, powerful corporate lawyers abandoned them the exact second their bank accounts were frozen by the government. Facing a mountain of undeniable forensic evidence, they both eagerly accepted plea deals to avoid a lengthy, humiliating public trial. But federal wire fraud and identity theft carry strict, mandatory minimums. They are currently serving 20-year sentences in a federal penitentiary located hundreds of miles away from their luxury cars, their tailored suits, and their elite country club memberships. Julian traded his expensive silk ties for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, and Malcolm is finally learning exactly what it means to be a nameless number in a rigid system he can no longer bribe his way out of. Their wealthy, pregnant wives filed for divorce before the first month of their incarceration was even overtaking whatever hidden assets they could salvage, and leaving both men completely isolated and entirely alone behind cold steel bars. My father Harrison survived his panic-induced heart attack that night, but he absolutely did not survive the catastrophic destruction of his fake holy empire. The National Church Oversight Board not only permanently stripped him of his pastoral title, but they actively cooperated with federal prosecutors to seize every single asset he had accumulated over 3 decades of spiritual manipulation and greed. His sprawling suburban mansion was auctioned off by the bank to cover the massive debts. His luxury vehicles were repossessed in broad daylight. The elite circles of Atlanta high society completely turned their backs on him, erasing his name from their guest lists and pretending they never knew him. He now lives in a tiny, rundown one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city, a disgraced, bitter old man who spends his days preaching his twisted version of reality to empty walls, desperately trying to convince himself that he is still a king of a kingdom that no longer exists. My mother Brenda and my sister Ebony fell the hardest because they had the absolute furthest to fall. Their entire identities and self-worth were completely wrapped up in their designer clothes, their exclusive gala invitations, and their perceived superiority over the rest of the world. When the federal freeze completely wiped out their trust funds and their personal bank accounts, They quickly discovered that the Black elite community of Atlanta has absolutely no patience for broke, disgraced socialites. Their so-called loyal friends immediately stopped answering their desperate phone calls. Their country club memberships were instantly revoked due to unpaid dues. With no practical skills, no higher education, and absolutely no real work ethic, they were violently forced into the exact same harsh, unforgiving reality they used to ruthlessly mock me for. Brenda is now working full-time as a cashier at a massive discount retail store. She is forced to stand on her aching feet for 8 hours a day scanning cheap clearance items for the very same working-class people she used to sneer at from the window of her luxury SUV. Ebony, the golden child who honestly believed she was destined to be a pampered, wealthy housewife, is currently working the grueling night shift at a fast food drive-thru. Her perfectly manicured hands are constantly burned by hot frying oil, and she goes home every single morning smelling like stale grease instead of expensive imported French perfume. They are drowning in massive debt, living paycheck to paycheck, in a cramped, damp apartment, constantly turning their bitter anger on each other because they have absolutely no one else left to blame for their spectacular ruin. While they are suffocating under the crushing, heavy weight of their own catastrophic choices, I am breathing free, clean air for the very first time in my entire existence. Exactly 1 year after that freezing night in the country club parking lot, I am standing in the center of my very own fine art gallery, right in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The space is absolutely magnificent, featuring soaring high ceilings, exposed historic brick walls, and massive skylights that flood the polished hardwood floors with warm, beautiful natural sunlight. The gallery specializes in showcasing brilliant, undiscovered African American artists, giving them the exact same powerful platform and financial opportunity that my grandfather gave me when he taught me how to recognize true hidden value in discarded things. My business is thriving beyond my absolute wildest dreams, expanding faster than I ever thought possible. But the money is completely secondary to the profound absolute peace that finally fills my soul. I look across the bright gallery and watch my two beautiful children, Miles and Leah, laughing hysterically as they run around a massive abstract metal sculpture. They are healthy, they are safe, and they are completely untouched by the dark generational trauma that tried to consume them. They will never, ever know the cold feeling of conditional love or the bitter, terrible sting of being told they are simply not good enough to exist. David walks up quietly behind me, wrapping his strong, warm arms around my waist and pressing a gentle, soft kiss to my shoulder. He is my absolute equal, my steady partner, and my greatest, most loyal supporter. He never once asked me to shrink my ambitions, to make his ego feel bigger. He never once looked at my brilliant success as a threat to his masculinity. We are building a beautiful, quiet life together, rooted deeply in profound mutual respect and pure, genuine love. Sometimes I think about my family, but the distant memories no longer carry any sharp pain or heavy anger. I do not hate them. Hate requires too much energy, and I absolutely refuse to spend another single drop of my precious energy on people who actively tried to destroy my spirit. I realize now that the ultimate sweetest revenge is not screaming or fighting or desperately trying to force toxic people to finally understand your immense worth. The ultimate absolute revenge is complete silence and a brilliantly successful life that your abusers can never ever touch. I built an impenetrable, glorious fortress of joy and prosperity out of the exact same heavy bricks they violently threw at me trying to break me. I took their cruel rejection, and I turned it into my absolute greatest redirection. If you are listening to my story right now, and you are currently trapped in a dark family dynamic where your love is constantly exploited, where your boundaries are entirely ignored, and where your very existence is treated as an annoying inconvenience, I need you to hear my words clearly. You do not owe your abusers your loyalty, simply because you happen to share the exact same blood. Sharing biological DNA does not give anyone a free pass to continuously disrespect your spirit or ruthlessly tear down your beautiful dreams. Sometimes the absolute most profound act of self-love you can ever possibly commit is walking away and going entirely no contact with the people who actively refuse to see your undeniable value. It takes unimaginable, terrifying courage to break the heavy, rusty chains of generational trauma and step out into the cold, terrifying unknown. But I promise you with every fiber of my being that the beautiful peace you will find on the other side is worth every single lonely tear. Do not ever let toxic family members convince you that you are hard to love just because they completely lack the emotional capacity to love you properly. Your incredible worth is not defined by their brokenness, and your future is not chained to their past. Take your time, heal your deep wounds, build your own beautiful chosen family from people who actually cherish you and never ever apologize for protecting your precious peace. Thank you so much for listening to my journey, and I truly hope you find the absolute courage to fiercely choose yourself today and every single day after. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is walking away from the people who refuse to see your worth. Sharing blood does not give anyone a free pass to exploit your spirit or tear down your dreams. Breaking the heavy chains of generational trauma takes unimaginable courage, but the peace you find on the other side is worth every tear. Your ultimate revenge will always be a beautifully successful life that your abusers can never touch. Have you ever cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Please share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe.